I am Cadet Takaldo.
Cadet Torres.
I'm Cadet Lucas.
I am Cadet Ersin.
And last but not the least, I am Cadet Alinio.
We are about to present you the ancient maritime history here in the Philippines. Starting off with an introduction by Cadet Tacaldo and Cadet Torres.
So to start, this paper attempts to provide a holistic interpretation of the process of ancient maritime history in the Philippines.
As stated, it aims to answer questions on the extent of the participation of the Philippines in maritime trade with other countries and vice versa to excavated remains found through the country.
Linguistic, genetic, and archaeological evidences indicate that the Philippines has been occupied by humans for many thousands of years. However, the earliest colonists who arrived in the archipelago are still to this date unknown. But growing evidences points to the likelihood that they possess seafaring technology. This means that modern Filipino nowadays inherited a rich heritage which is a mystery yet to be fully revealed. Even before the Spanish conquerors arrived in the Philippines, during the 16th century, early Filipinos already had a highly developed society with seafaring technology capable of making routine voyages across vast open seas.
To continue, early history shows that Filipino ancestors are already capable of traveling throughout different places, such as Southeast Asia trade routes and the Maritime Silk Road. Voyages that even reached as far as the eastern coast of Vietnam and all the way north to China. There are stories about hand-carved wooden boats that were so large that they could carry entire families, but light enough that it could be lifted on the shoulders of few men and capable enough to sail both deep ocean waters and shallow island reefs. A fact that left the Spanish with their grand and heavy ships in astonishment.
So in the body of our research paper, we have subdivided it into three remains, which are the foreign body, the remains of ships, and lastly, the artifacts. So these are our gathered data that could prove the existence of pre-colonial maritime history in the Philippines. So in the foreign body, we have explained that the Philippines is an archipelago comprising of 7,641 islands, and it's home to tribes who conquered the great seas with their wooden boats. Due to the exceptional skills in seamanship, trade and exchange with bordering Southeast Asian countries, especially China, was developed extensively and so thoroughly. However, it is not the only neighboring Southeast Asian countries who emerged to influence the Philippines in the pre-colonial period. The movements of migrants from Arabian Peninsula in the 13th century brought Islam in the archipelago. These Muslim merchants exhibit a trade path along Asian circuit that transport goods between Malay Peninsula, Sumatra, Java, through the Malacca Strait towards China. This shift in maritime routes, or widely known as the biographical region of Malaysia, occasioned an outflow of teachers, traders, and missionaries from the region, then finding their way to Southeast Asia, including the Philippines. As a result, the residing migrants gave rise to the well-established sultanates in Maguindanao and Sulu points beforehand the Spanish colonization. Austronesians are historically referred as the ancestors of the majority of the population of Southeast Asians. An especially potent and versatile culture flourished by fishing and gardening techniques. These maritime gardeners honed the skills of seafaring, which played a vital role in the extensive colonization in the human history, known as the Austronesian expansion. This expansion spread south through the Philippines to the Celebes, the Moluccas, northern Borneo, and eastern Java. As stated by Bloss, 1976, the Austronesian language adopted some of the largest dialects like Tagalog, Cebuano, Ilocano, Hiligaynon, and Bicolano, were the linguistic evidence that Austronesians are the first inhabitants in the Philippines.
For ship remains, numerous Asian ship and boat remains are only an indication that the Philippines has a rich maritime history. Traditional boats made by the early Filipinos saved the narrow straits and even the vast open seas. Nowadays, remains of it were found near or in the coastal areas of the country. Below are sources on traditional Philippine boats, boat building, navigation, as well as indigenous maritime cultures. This is the first example. This is the Caracoa. The Caracoa is a traditional Visayan warship made without nails and is known to be 3 times as fast as the Spanish galleon. Its purpose is to gain prestige through combat, taking plunder, capturing slaves or hostages. Ancient Filipino warriors performed a ceremony called the Pagdaga, where the prow and the keel of the Caracoa warships were smeared with blood drawn from the captured member of the target enemy settlement before proceeding into raid. According to Vega, the Caracoa and the other pre-Hispanic Filipino plank-built vessels belong to a tradition of marine architecture dating back to the 3rd century BCE, spanning from the Scandinavia to the South Pacific. For our next evidence is the Balangay. The Balangay or the Putuan boat is a watercraft made in wood and was used by Austronesian peoples in their accommodation here in the Philippines and the Malay archipelago. It was accidentally discovered by the locals and excavated in the river of Masao, Butuan City, Agusan del Norte, in the late 1970s, and is known as the oldest pre-Hispanic watercraft found in the Philippines. Balangay is not only used in transporting goods, fishing, piracy, but ancient Filipinos believe that the balangays they make will deliver them safely in the afterlife. Spanish said that as a symbol and a metaphor of a vessel taken on a journey between the corporeal and the spiritual realm, it is a vehicle for communing with the spirit world and for transversing to the transitory state between life and death and life again. Our next evidence is the bangka. Bangka is a single outrigger dagal canoes used by the Austronesian peoples in their dwelling in the Philippines. According to Macam, these boats were the first ocean voyaging vessels in the world, which allowed the seaborne Austronesian expansion around 3000 to 1500 BCE from coastal southeastern China and Taiwan to island Southeast Asia, Micronesia, island Polynesia, and Madagascar. This bangkas is mainly used in trading and riding the prehistoric era. One of the rituals is called the bakalag. It is done by launching the boat by rolling into logs and a human sacrifice.
So this is an example image of an ear pendant made out of green nephrite called Ling Ling, all perennial earring. So Taiwan used to provide ear pendants from green nephrite around the southern and eastern coastlines of the South China Sea. Countries that were involved with the nephrite ear ornament, so-called Ling Ling or perennial earring, what you saw earlier, was a trade in the area where East Malaysia, South Vietnam, Peninsular Thailand, and as well as the Philippines. Well, the presence of Fengshan nephrite from 3 separate archaeological assemblages between Taiwan and Luzon in the islands of Batanes were continued between 1000 BC and 500 AD until the Iron Age after settling of Neolithic migrants on Luzon from Taiwan 4,000 years ago. During the porcelain period, where in a study before 1,000 to 125 years, Philippines were visited by Chinese merchant vessels for the purpose of trading goods and supplies. Furthermore, a first real account of Luzon appears in Ming Annals, chapter 323, where it was called Luzon, and was described to be in the South Sea near Changchu in Fukien. Based from the Chinese records, listed Philippine chieftains and Chinese traders trades showed a regular and active trade during the 10th century. Due to lucrative economic exchange during 972, the first emperor of the Song dynasty began to establish maritime trade offices to deal with the ongoing commerce on that time, which that led to increase of maritime activities and berthing of commercial vessels in their affiliated countries, including major parts of the Philippines.
For our contextual analysis, the researchers are trying to supply information to the readers about the pre-colonial maritime history in the Philippines. The evidences of foreign and local artifacts and boat remains that were found in the historical sites prove the existence of early maritime activity in the country. This study is intended for reference of future researchers. The sequence of the research started with an introduction where the early Filipino settlers acquired advanced seafaring technology, and for the background study, it stated the purpose of the research. The body talked about the evidence found and made proof that were seafaring technology and their culture before the Spanish era. It is built as an informative research paper. The researchers used the English language as the international language, while the imagery used are different evidences found by numerous historians. The spelling, grammar, vocabulary, and punctuation was exceptional. The authors did not go too deep with the wordings, but made it very brief and understandable so that we could acknowledge it clearly.
The effectiveness of communicating the main idea was very impressive. From the facts on the way to discussing the importance of this idea, overall was splendid. It may have good ideas, but there are still some commodities that needed to be improved. The author speaks in the dominant part of society because this impacts or changes the idea of other people in the educational system during the pandemic. The effectiveness of communicating the main idea was very impressive. From the facts on the way to discussing the importance of this, overall was splendid. It may have some good ideas, but there are still some commodities that needed to be improved. The author speaks in a dominant part of society because this impacts or changes the idea of other people in the educational system during this pandemic. The text engages the real world today for the particular reason that if this was not found, then the Philippines would not have ways of improving their seafaring technology. For our conclusion, to sum up everything that has been stated so far, it seems that prior to the Spanish period, evidence was found that Asian Filipino people were already rich in the maritime technology, building numerous ancient ships and boats that can sail the narrow straits and even the vast open sea. Social, political, and economic development of the larger Southeast Asian region had a significant impact on the transportation of Philippine complex societies and the foundation of ports in the country for accommodating foreign ships as well as the locals.
To continue, the ships and boats mentioned have provided a glimpse of the volume and variety of uses in the Philippines. The evolution and impact of this utilization, however, were different at each of the locations, suggesting the importance of the trajectories of local societies. Through these boats and ships that were made for multiple purposes, it gave us knowledge in the early maritime trade and made us improve our utilities when it comes to maritime knowledge today. These are the references.